Chodesh Tov. Chodesh Tov Ma'od, everybody. Okay, so we're picking up in the middle of a piece, so I just want to take a moment to review outside. We started the psukim that describe Gan Eden and man's relationship with Gan Eden, and we're going to continue. There's a few verses following talking about Gan Eden, and we'll be picking up with a greater theme. We're just going to pause for a second. Okay, so we're dedicating this learning session Li'iloi Nishmat Jetel Bat Avraham and Sarah Bat Jetel, and we are all having in mind for the merit of Am Yisrael and their Hatzlacha, and for their safety and protection, and for the Hatzlacha and the protection of the soldiers. Our learning should be a schus for all of Am Yisrael. Okay, so we started the topic of the nature of Gan Eden. The verse immediately following the description of Hashem Elokim fashioning Adam himself, it uses the same appellation, Hashem Elokim, describing how God planted a garden in Eden. And I'm going to read the pasuk again. Vayita Adonai Elohim gan be'edem mikedem, vayasem sham es ha'adam asher yatzar. That God, Havaya Elokim, this is the second instance that it's used, right? We just had it in the verse before to talk about the special connection that God had in fashioning man, that he was a product of God's own hand, so to speak. So here it says that Havaya Elokim planted a garden within Eden, mikedem, and from before. And we noted this word, Vayasem sham et ha'adam, and he placed man in there. Asher yatzar, the verse reiterates that he had fashioned, meaning the previous verse just said that God fashioned man, and then it says it over here again. So we noted, mikedem means from before, and what does it mean, Asher yatzar, which seems to be superfluous. And until now, the Alshech HaKadosh has been explaining to us that Hashem Elokim here means that there is a special connection between man and Gan Eden. Meaning, first we noted that Mikedem has two alternative approaches. Mikedem could mean that God created Gan Eden before man or before creation. One of the 7 things, right, in a list of things that Chazal say that were made before creation. So we question what would be the significance of creating it. Meaning, if it means before man, it means the schar, the reward that ultimately he's meant to achieve should be prepared first for him. But if it means before creation, what is the point? Why would God single this out of a list of 7 things and not tell us the other 6? Why is it important to note it here? And we started with the approach of, because of it says at the end superfluously, Asher Yatzar, right? Man that God had fashioned, which is totally superfluous. We said that we're noting here that there's an intrinsic connection being built. There's a shidduch being made between Adam and Gan Eden. So we question, why would God put Adam in the garden if the garden is meant to be his schar? Why put him in the garden before he actually does any mitzvot? So we said that over here, really what it means is that just like Hashem Elokim is noting in the formation of man that he's distinct, that he's Yitzir Kapav, and this prepares his coarse elements, his guf, which comes from the lower world, to receive a neshama, an intrinsic, transcendent paradox. So too, Hashem Elokim here is fashioning Gan Eden, that there should be a unique, a relationship that Adam has with Gan Eden. And the Alshech HaKadosh explained that it's not like serving God is not like serving any other master, like a servant would serve the king. That a servant who serves the king, he's remunerated with reward. The reward that he receives doesn't have an intrinsic connection to who he is. It's something he receives as an exchange, economic exchange. Whereas when you serve God, you are getting closer and closer to God. And the Gan Eden, or the proximity to the spiritual dimension that Gan Eden represents, is a function of you, and you're coming close. And therefore there's an intrinsic spiritual qualitative difference, this unique connection that man has to his schar, as if he's acquiring himself, is what the pasuk is trying to denote here, that there's this unique relationship that God had to actively connect between Adam Rishon and Gan Eden. That's what we talked about until now.
The connection is because both pasukim have
Hashem Elokim and Asher Yatzar. The Asher Yatzar,
Asher
right.
Yatzar also.
Right. And the Mikedem, so we still, right? And then that's why we're saying over here that of the list of 7 things that were created before Bereshit, over here we're only noting, God is trying to tell you that Gan Eden is something that is supernal, that has this unique connection, and yet it has this unique connection with man.
It seems very strange because that connection is so temporal. You know, we lost it after a few hours, and we've never connected.
So this is okay. I'm so glad you mentioned that. I want to say that in the context of the last piece that we read, the observation you just made raises a greater theme that I want to look at for a second. So remember, the last piece we talked about the verb vayipach as noting the manner in which God granted Adam his soul, and we explained that through the words of the Medrash that God threw. He was Zorek, and we contrasted that with Latid Lavo. Ultimately, God will give us it as a netina, that there's a tenuous provisional relationship that Adam had with his soul that ultimately, at the end of this all, it's going to be a native connection, an intrinsic connection. It's as if that man is being granted something beyond himself right now in a provisional way, and that's meant to make a sort of turn him into a kli that he can ultimately achieve it. Like we talked about, let's say, it says in the mitzvah d'oraita of counting the Omer, it says, Umacharat Shabbat, after Shabbos, usfartam lachem, you should count for yourselves. And the whole issue here of why the Torah characterizes the first day of Pesach as Shabbos and not Pesach, giving room for the tzedukim to say that no, it means the first Yom Rishon after Pesach starts. And the whole idea of Usfartam Lachem, that there's Hit'orut de Le'ela on Pesach, that you're meant to achieve yourself, starting from Usfartam Lachem. So what I want to say is that this is the Torah, this is the theme of the Shalom Zachar. If anybody wants to see, maybe we hinted at that in our Parsha discussions of the Alshech on Parshat Shlach. And we talked about the setup, the inherent setup of the Egel and the Meraglim, and ultimately why that was just a micro of the setup of Gan Eden. This is what I want to say, that the Torah of the Shalom Zachar is, why does the baby learn Kol HaTorah Kula with the Malach if he's meant to forget it all? Imagine Adam Rishon being kicked out of Gan Eden and struggling to realize, as we are right now, that that was all a setup and that was just something that was beyond what we had the tools to make viable at that time, but to raise the bar and make us capable so that we can get back into Gan Eden of our own accord. Just like God saying, right now I have to throw your soul into you, because you don't have it's not native. I have to use force to really, it has to go from from the domain where it's natural into you, right? And that's a tenuous relationship that's ultimately not viable or sustainable in and of itself. Why was that necessary? So that ultimately it can be a netina. And that we have to go through a transformative process. But we would not be able to go through that process or be guided by it without an initial experience that even on its own strengths would be unsustainable. Okay, so do you follow the theme?
Yeah.
Okay, so here we're saying too that man, in order to man for ultimately to receive schar, that's a manifestation of his own being, his own connection with God, he has to be there needs to be a shadchan at first, because it's a non-natural connection. There needs to be something that makes, humanity is a transcendent paradox, that it's our limitations that make it so amazing that we can connect to something that's totally beyond us. Okay? That's the nature, that's the grand paradox between the two main elements of human experience. That's your soul and your body, right? So that's what we're talking about here. And then the Alshech HaKadosh in future essays on some of the following verses which describe Gan Eden, he'll use this as a springboard to talk about dimensionality and the nexus between physicality and spirituality. That, we're going to talk about how Gan Eden itself is a domain in which there's perfect union between physical and spiritual, that you can take something physical from Gan Eden, which ultimately is a physical manifestation of a spiritual idea, and even bringing it to the physical world. Like he talks about the olive branch in the mouth of the dove in Yonah. The Chazal say that it was taken out of Gan Eden, and he says, how can it be an actual olive branch? In coming to explain some of the following psukim that describe the actual flora of Gan Eden. If Gan Eden is a spiritual place and it represents a spiritual idea, and it's our schar lati lavo, what are actual flora doing there? Why is it describing the trees? So we're going to talk, meaning we're talking now about the nature, that we're characterizing that tenuous relationship in phase A between physicality and spirituality to ultimately achieve phase B, which is the perfect union. And so too, we're going to start talking about how there's this place, this dimension called Gan Eden, where there's a perfect, it's no more spiritual than it is physical, and vice versa. And you have absolute manifestation. Okay. So, let's go back. Let's just finish up the piece that we just reviewed. Excuse me. Okay.
Where is it?
We are on page 31 in my edition here. Let me borrow this for a moment, please. We are over here. Od Tam Sheni. Okay. Od Tam Sheni. So, after talking about that whole theme, we're going to give a second answer or an explanation to why the Torah is articulating this here. There's a lesson for us in the here and now. V'hu l'lamed la'adam da'at, to instruct a human with knowledge of divine intent. Bal ya'aleh al rucho, lest it be raised in his spirit. She'atzrena hageshem v'achomer la'adam mila'asig ha'osher. Lest a person make an error and think that the physicality that he engenders, the material part of him, would keep him from achieving true eternal bliss. Don't think that you're hampered by your physical existence to have a relationship with God and ultimately achieve an eternal reward. So we see, for example, that with the righteous ones, the tzaddikim, that their spiritual soul does not lose at all by being bound to their physical body. Just the opposite. We see by the righteous that even their physical body acquires a sanctity and an elevated transcendence from its association with their soul. And a swift witness to these two phenomena, Adam Harishon, in the example of Adam Harishon, Ki behiyoto meshulal chet, in his stage when he was lacking any sin, before he sinned, hayta nafsho me'eleha dveka b'shasha, his soul was naturally cleaving to its root, udveka b'gan Eden, and it was already cleaving to the dimension of Gan Eden. V'lo ya'atzar hageshem, and the fact that he incorporated also an element of material being did not stop him at all from actually being in the garden. Ki im beguf nefesh, because with body and soul, not to know Hashem began Eden, God placed him in Gan Eden, including his body, his physical, whatever that was before the Chet. Remember, just noting here, that material existence itself was not experienced on this low level now till after the sin. But it did incorporate that whole level of the Olam HaAsiyah was already incorporated, had access to this spiritual dimension. Terem Ya'aseh mitzvot, even before Adam Rishon fulfilled any of God's commandments. L'masha hayta tahora b'li hafsek tumah, because just on the strength of the fact that he was pure, without any sort of separation of impurity. Ki nafsho kshura b'shasha asher b'gan Eden, because his soul naturally connected and was bound to its root that lay within the garden in Eden. Od me'ein zeh, and just a further point, similarly, leman neda me'ata tachlit atid, and the verse expects you to take it just a step further and understand how it could be in the future. Shebihizdakech hachomer bechor haaretz, that when the material, the physical existence itself will be purified, v'niskeh v'nechia begufa nefesh, and we will merit both in physical body and in soul. Nihiyeh dvekim b'Hashem, we will be bound to Hashem, ka'adam kodem sheyechata, like Adam Rishon before he sinned, v'hotar, and even more. Meaning we have to know what's ultimately possible for us is an eternal state of how it was for Adam Rishon in this initial moment before he sinned. as he was blissfully enjoying the delights, the spiritual eternal delights of Gan Eden, even before he had to fulfill any mitzvot, almost like the perfect union of a fetus in the womb. But v'hoter, but more, because he is an adult with the ability to have perfect knowledge of God. Ukema'amar Eliyahu, and like Eliyahu says, Shakadosh Baruch Hu oseh lahem knafayim, ultimately God will make for the souls of the righteous wings. Shehu ke'otan sheshesh knafayim la'echad. That is similar to the angels, the class of angels that are described in Yecheskel that have 6 wings each. Sheyiu kemalachei hasharet beguf nefesh. Humanity will be refined, that even in body, including body and soul, they will be refined like the angels on high. Ki lo yeh haguf ka'adam shenilosh ba'afar u'mayim shel eid she'ala min haaretz. They will not be like a man who had a body that was made out of the kneading together a dough of dirt and the moisture of the vapor that rose from the earth, like described in the verse. Ki im betal orot elyonim, but rather like an essence that was combined of a dough made up of the dew of the lights of the supernal worlds. Okay, that's that piece. Questions, comments, suggestions? Okay, we have a lot to look forward to, apparently. That's the punchline. But we have a lot to do because it raises our bar of what's possible and what's meant for us. Okay.